room. That's probably why instead of a dedicated link.
All right, so Jack, to put this in context, what are we using right now? How do we get to this screen that you were on?
Okay, help me. Hold on. I'll just share my whole screen. So I use Heidi SQL, it's called. It's just like an interface so that you can look at like MySQL databases. So like I have the WHIMC one set up. It's it uses the same credentials as is on Beastnode. But yeah, it just shows you like the actual databases, and you can also query stuff. So anyway, you'll see that on the left, so this is our database, MC, whatever, and that's just given to us from Beastnode, and then we have a bunch of tables within the database. So all the tables that are prefixed with CO are core protect tables. And so you can go through each one and kind of look at the data. So there's an art map, it's called. I think this is used internally to like know the name of each art. A lot of these, like it's not super obvious what's going on. So let's take a look at block. So the row ID is like just like the ID that the action is corresponding to. And this just increments by 1 every time there's some sort of block interaction. The time is just a timestamp of what happens. And then this user, this is a user ID. I'll go over that in a little, but it corresponds to whatever user actually did it. WID, this is world ID, same thing as user ID, but it corresponds to a world. You have the XYZ of the block. Type, I forget what type is offhand. It might be like metadata that's added to the block. I guess that's what data
You
is.
think it's subtypes, like a stair turned to the north is like, stairs
yeah.
going.
Yeah, it definitely could be.
That's what I would think too.
Data, this might be like damage data. I forget. And then meta, I think it's just like metadata, and block data. I'm not sure. I haven't actually messed with these. I never had to use them. Action, again, I forget what all the numbers correspond with. This isn't labeled anywhere. I think 0 is like breaking, 1 is placing. This is actually in the source code of the like MCIE thing. I found them like manually and documented them. And then this rolled back is just like a 0 or 1, or whether or not it had been rolled back. You can kind of explore and kind of tell what each of them is just by like looking through, but like, so let's look at this block data. Okay, yeah, so this is block data. So if we look at data, so 2 corresponds with waterlogged equals false. And I guess 0 is just no data. And so these are just like, I'm assuming what's happening is that they go through like all the different types of like phases or like modes that a block can be in and just correspond to them. And so instead of it having like the string be there, it's just the integer that maps to this table. So then the chat, this is just a log of all chat that has ever been said. Again, row ID, time, user ID, world ID, their position, and where they said it.
Jack, does chat catch command? It does catch commands. There
this
it
is a different table. Yeah,
okay.
It's the same thing, but with commands. CO containers. So this is with like chests. This metadata thing, I think this is like the contents of the chest. It is not like user readable. I think this is just like a serialized like array list of items. So you don't really have to worry about this. The database lock, don't really know what that is. I think that's just for when it's editing. You don't have to worry about that. CO entity. I'm also not sure what this is. We haven't really used that. I think this is probably just like a serialization of the actual entity that's like in the world. So I think like within this value, within this like data is stored like the entire thing about the entity. But again, you don't really have to worry about that.
I imagine it's like the position that the entity is facing, how much damage has happened to it, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. So there's probably some way to decode that, but I haven't had to worry about that. Entity map, same thing where the ID maps to a type. An item, so CO item. I think this has to do with like items on the ground and stuff, or maybe items in the inventory. But yeah, so there's like the ID, the user in the world, XYZ, the type. Okay, so if we look at the material map, I think that's what type corresponds to. So type 6 would be gray carpet. And then the amount and the action. So again, I don't know what the actions are offhand. But this is probably like interacting with items. So if you have an item in your hand, like maybe mining something with an item or right clicking with an item or dropping an item. Yeah, so I guess I went over material map. So session, this is like logging in and out. I think a 1 means logging in and 0 means logging out. I actually used this in the MCIE thing. I mapped like sessions where one session is logging in and logging out. So since this logs both actions of both logging in and logging out, I kind of had to do some workarounds. I guess this is pretty self-explanatory though. This is, the user and then where they logged in, their position where they logged in, and then the position where they logged out. So sign, same thing as you'd expect is like chat. Now you get the position. I think action, so 0 is probably placing and 1 is breaking. Not 100% sure. I don't know what color is. Oops. Cool. All right, whatever. Yeah, so this is just all the data on the signs. You really don't have to mess around with like what action and color are. I think the main thing whenever I pull these are just line 1, 2, 3, 4 and grabbing them as along with the user. All right, so
Yeah,
scroll.
that looked like that was item frames, not just signs. Because I guess I'm seeing a lot of the image on map in there. PBS
Oh, really?
logo is image on map.
Oh,
So this may give us a hint as to why that croaked the other day. But yeah, all of those, like, so a lot of these are my named
oh.
maps. Like the at the bottom there, that chunk of them. And it's NASA TV, PBS logo, all that. Those are image on map labeled.
This might be, so this might also be corresponding to, yeah, like a map that's in an item frame since they have a name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Okay.
Yeah, this might
Interesting.
kind of hint us towards why that messed up then. The skull, I think this is just like mapping an ID to like a UUID and like when it was placed. Because skulls themselves correspond to like a player skull. And so I think this just caches what player the skull was. All right, cool. And then this user thing, this is actually what maps the user ID to the player. And so you'll notice, within Core Protect, my ID is 9. And, it just gives it the name and then also the UUID. Jeff, you were mentioning the UUID. It's just basically a username, but since you can change your username, there has to be some sort of set identifier for a player. And that's what the UUID is.
Yeah, no, it's not what it was. It was the consistency. So the UUID used to identify which image on map signs you put down is different than the UUID for which quests you've completed. And that's a problem. I want the same thing across so I can know, as opposed to having to open up every single file to dig into it to try to find if there's a Minecraft handle in there.
Yeah. Are the names of the files not just the UUID?
I want to confirm that's the case, but last time I looked at that was what it appeared to be. Or maybe that's also how image on map broke. Okay. So let me double check that right now.
Because so like this is my UUID and it always will be, like with this account. But either way, so there's also like pound, cow, wolf, I think these are just correspond to actions that like these entities did. So like maybe a cow, I don't know, like broke, like walked over crops and they broke. So they would correspond to this cow. Obviously they don't have a UUID. All right, and then username log. This is like so since you can change your username, it just maps the UUID to whatever like username they had. So if I changed my name right now, there would be another entry in here that has the same UUID, but just a different name. Version, I think this just internally used with the plugin. World, so this is what's mapping world ID to the actual name. And then so these are our custom tables. So WHIMC observations, again, they have their own row ID. You get the time that they were made, the UUID of the player, the username of the player, the world they were created, all the positional stuff about where they were looking when they created it, the actual observation, whether or not it's active, and when it expires. Excuse me. And in the future, there will be another column of the category. And then player observations, pretty self-explanatory. Just, you know, the ID, position, world name, username, UUID, and the time that it happened. Yeah. If so, what was I going to say? Oh, yeah, I guess I have an update on the database stuff. So I actually wrote a like schema migration that can be implemented into our plugins. I guess this is separate from what the database will look like, but I wrote a schema migration that integrates with the plugins that allows different schema versions to be updated. So that's a solution to the problem that we had previously. Yeah, I definitely went pretty fast, but we are 2 minutes after 1. So are there any questions about anything?
Player positions was just the every 3 seconds you get the coordinates
Yeah.
in a username. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm over here trying to confirm the mismatch theory. Anyway, thank you. Any questions from the general group?